Alright guys, it's Ollie from flightcomp, and I have had zero motivation to work on this SR-7 glider in the last few months. But today I thought, what the hell, I'll start applying the fiberglass to the wing and get into the finishing process here. I've actually already sprayed a very light mist coat of clear spray paint over all the parts, all the wood parts of the wing and tails, and I'm just hoping that that'll kind of seal the wood slightly and it'll soak up less epoxy, because I kind of just want it to sit in the glass on top and not soak into the parts themselves. And I have already cut up my fiberglass here for, I'm going to do the top of the wing and just one side of the tails and one side of the ailerons. And then we'll let that dry and do a little bit of finish work or trimming on the edges. And then flip it over and do the other sides. And I'm using 3/4 ounce fiberglass. So let me get a little piece here. Stuff's very, very lightweight. One of the lightest materials you can get as far as fiberglass goes. There is a 1/2 ounce. I've used 1/2 ounce before. It's a little lighter than this. This stuff is great just for applying, just for glassing parts, just for finish purposes. It won't add much strength. So this stuff's hard to work with. It moves around a lot, and you can distort the weave really easily. See, like that. You have to be really, really careful and kind of use kid gloves with this stuff. So the placement's going to be important, not touching the glass too much. And I'm going to try using a small foam roller to apply the epoxy. And the epoxy I'm going to be using is poly epoxy, available from Aircraft Spruce. Aircraft Spruce is a great source for epoxy and some other composite materials. I'll leave links below. You could also use West Systems or MGS, or a really easy resin to use, epoxy resin, would be Pacer's epoxy. It would be perfect for this. I like the poly epoxy because it's got very long working time, and I'm not in a rush, so I'd rather have more time to be able to work and not rush through getting the glass on. So let me set up for this. I'm going to mix up some resin and put the camera on a tripod and see what happens. Alright, let's get started. I mixed up a very little bit of epoxy with about half microballoons and half Cabosil, and I'm going to use this kind of in these areas here just to make a real small fillet, because the glass won't want to go in there. It'll bridge. So let's start with that. And you don't want to overdo it, because you don't really want to have to spend a ton of time sanding here if you put a lot of filler, because you just end up making more work for yourself. So just a little bit. This reminds me of my previous life when I used to manufacture motorcycle fairings for road racing bikes. And it seemed like half the time would just be putting this Cabosil in all the corners of the molds and everything. I've made hundreds of sets of molds for motorcycle stuff in my lifetime. Oh. Excuse my phone. Someone always calls you as soon as you mix up epoxy. That's the way it works. It's just one of those rules of nature. Okay, looking pretty good. Almost done with this. So yeah, when I was a kid, when I was in my teens, I was making molds and vacuum bagging wings for RC gliders. Back then we'd use a hot wire and just blue foam or white foam. And I made some fuselage molds for slope gliders and thermal duration kind of gliders. And then a little later in life in college, I got into road racing motorcycles and couldn't really afford to buy a lot of the parts, so I applied what I learned from RC stuff and just started making my own parts. So kind of a neat story. I had probably 9 Suzuki GSXRs in my life, just because the track tends to destroy them, so you go through bikes. Let me put a little more over here, and then we can get started with the glass. Okay, that worked out well. Move that and start with the first half. I'll do this half first, and hopefully I've laid this out somewhat correctly. So like I said, this stuff is really easy to distort and stretch out, so having an epoxy that's has a long working time, it just makes your life a little bit easier, so you're not rushing. Okay, that right there is looking pretty good. I think I'll go with this, and I'm just going to drizzle on a little bit of this, and I'm hoping the roller works well. I have a feeling it'll, in the initial stages, it'll lift up the glass a little bit, but I'm going to start from kind of the center of the wing and just sort of work out. So I'm going to go real easy, go one way first. If I were to roll back and forth right now, it would just totally peel up the glass, so I'm just kind of going to go one direction. I should have put some epoxy in a little container and then saturated the roller first. But, you know, I am an impatient man, so I didn't do that. Alright, it's about an hour later, and I've got the glass on everything, and my epoxy is just kind of starting to gel up very slightly, so that worked out well. I think if I would have gone much longer, I would have ran out of time. So what I'm going to do is try to soak up a little bit of the excess epoxy on some of the parts, and I'm just going to lay out some toilet paper like this. Toilet paper seems to soak up stuff better than paper towel. I'm not going to go too crazy with this, just see if we can get a little bit off. So I'm just going to roll over this with the roller. On here. Don't want to spend too much time, especially if your epoxy's still pretty wet, then this goes really easy, but if it's starting to kick off a little bit, it'll stick. The toilet paper will stick, so you know, you kind of just gotta eyeball it, and or you could do it. I could have. Maybe the smarter thing was to finish one half, then put the toilet paper on, and then go to that half. Probably could have soaked up a little more epoxy that way. So after I do this, I'm just kind of gonna go over everything and make sure everything's laying down and just kind of none of the edges are lifting up. And that'll basically be it for this side. I'm going to let these parts cure for at least 24 hours. Then I'm going to trim up the excess and flip them over and do the other half. And after that, we'll still kind of have exposed leading edges. So after I get this 1/2 ounce glass on, or I'm sorry, 3/4 ounce on both sides, then I'm going to wrap the leading edges and tips with some one layer of 1.5 ounce glass. That'll make the tips and the leading edges much stronger. Pretty important on the leading edge. Somebody in the comments said they built an SR-7 and it came with spruce leading edge material, and this kit definitely didn't have that. And I think even the instructions mentioned balsa wood, so I don't know if they made a change at some point, but yeah. I didn't put balsa leading edges just so they were easier to sand. It's what the kit had, and it's what I used. Well, it's been a couple of days since I glassed these surfaces, just to let the epoxy fully cure, because again, it's a very slow setting epoxy. And all I'm going to do now is basically just trim up some of the edges here. I've already done all the other surfaces. Here's the elevator, and I've trimmed the excess and just lightly, basically just scuffed these with some 220 grit sandpaper, just to kind of take the shine off and knock down any high spots. But I'm not going to worry too much about the sanding yet. We'll deal with that after we get primer on it. So it's really easy just to trim these parts up because the glass is so easy to cut. Just get a sharp X-Acto, or you can use a razor blade and just run it along the edge like this. That's basically it. It's really easy to clean this up. Just kind of go around all the edges, and then do the aileron here, aileron cutout. Like so. Go around the tip. Don't nick the wood, just get the glass, and if you're not super accurate, it doesn't matter because we're going to sand these slightly. Like that. And then I'll finish this up, but just take some 220, or maybe I'd say 180 to 250 grit sandpaper. I'm using 220. And all you're going to want to do is just kind of just knock off the edge slightly of the glass. It's only going to take a few swipes. Again, just a few swipes, and that's all you need. Anyway, you get the idea. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of this. And then I'm going to flip these parts over and get the second layer of glass on. I'm not going to show you that because it's just identical to the process we already did. But after we get the top and bottom layers of glass on, we can address the leading edges and the tips on all the parts. We're going to use a slightly heavier glass and just use a strip and wrap it around so we get a slightly stronger leading edge. So once I finish all this trim work, we'll start putting the glass down on the leading edges. I cut some strips out, and this is going to be reinforcing fiberglass for the leading edges of the wings, the wing tips, and the leading edges of the tails, and also the tips of the tails. This is, I believe, about a 1.5 ounce glass, and I have cleaned up the leading edges on all the parts, a little bit of light sanding to keep them smooth. And what I'm going to do is mist these with a little bit of 3M77 spray adhesive and let that sort of dry. And then I'm going to try to apply these dry on all the parts and get them in place. And hopefully that way they'll wrap around the leading edges and wingtips without too much fuss. And then once they're in place, I'll apply the resin to them. Here's what these parts look like with the glass applied on the leading edges and tips with the contact spray. It's really gonna make it easier to get resin on here because everything is already kind of pre-attached. So kind of a good tip. Leading edge of the wing, tip here. I got the elevator, same thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and get some epoxy mixed up and get these done. Well, the epoxy's all cured up on the tips and leading edges of the wing and the tail parts. Pretty clean job. You can see there's some little pieces I have to trim up, obviously. And I also glassed the front of this surface that mates to the fuselage here, so I gotta trim this up. So what I'm gonna do now is just lightly sand. First I'll trim some things, and then I'll lightly sand with 220. And I'm not looking to do any leveling or smooth the surface really. I'm just trying to knock down any ridges or big high spots, but I'm not trying to actually get a nice surface with the sanding I'm doing right now.
But he still loved aircraft and made a line of plastic toy flying super jets for children on acetate cars were known for warping, which occasionally called the grills to get what was called derisively the Johan smile. Competitors like AMT were already fully committed to styrofoam and solved this issue in 1963. These were models with bright surface again, $250 to make it mold. This was probably Johan's phenomenon moment. They made a gold one and a white one, as well as a kit. Sold the actual car earlier. The model was the best-selling thing Johan put out to date. Things continued to improve in the 1960s, and in 1964,
finally, we got all the fiberglass work done, and we're ready to move on to just drowning all this in primer and sanding. Probably take a few coats of primer and some sanding, and we'll get the surface nice and smooth. Just show you kind of what this looks like. Definitely not perfect with the fiberglass, but again, wasn't really trying to get it perfect because the primer is going to help us with the surface finish. So that's about it. I think I'm going to wrap this one up here. Made a lot of progress, and next video we'll actually get into the finishing of this thing, getting the primer on. I hope for the next video we'll get the primer on and done and have a nice smooth surface for applying the paint. And then maybe in the video after that we'll get some paint on this guy and be nearly done. It's been a long time, but again, I'm just working on this maybe a couple hours a month at the most right now. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next one.